Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories.
This is Marilyn Monroe's famous speech at President Kennedy's birthday party. Marilyn had an affair with both the president and his brother Bobby Kennedy. 3 months after this performance, the actress will be found dead. John F. Kennedy will be assassinated in a year. His brother will be shot in 5 years. In the death of all three, many riddles and mysteries will arise. What really happened? Who or what killed the most famous actress of the United States at the age of 36, almost at the peak of her career? Spoiler, no one knows the absolute truth, but we will analyze the versions. In this video, you will find a full biography of the legendary actress. From a shy girl from an orphanage to a treasure of American culture. This will not be a tedious biography. That is, of course, we will talk about art, society, history, but also, for example, we will discuss nude photos of the actress in detail. Right now, I'm going to tell you about the public and secret life of a movie legend, what she was hiding, and who the actress model sex symbol really was. Okay, I'll be honest, I've only seen one movie with Marilyn Monroe before in my entire life. Yes, when preparing this video, I responsibly watched 5 more. I mean, if you are not a cinephile and are relatively young, then you may not have seen a single movie with the participation of the legendary blonde. And it doesn't matter. Even without watching a movie, everyone knows who Marilyn Monroe is, what she looks like, and what she symbolizes. What's the secret? It would seem that the last film with the participation of the star was released 60 years ago. Many question Marilyn's acting talent. And in general, they say any blonde with forms could be in her place. But why exactly is Marilyn Monroe one of the most famous symbols of American culture? A little history. The point of the report can be considered 1953rd year. By that time, Marilyn Monroe was already quite a famous actress, but in the 53rd, she became a real star. Then the films How to Marry a Millionaire appeared on the screens, and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. It was from there, and not from the Viagra group, but the whole world learned that the best friends of girls are diamonds. The films were a huge success, but the main thing is that the image was finally formed in them. A little silly, naive, at the same time incredibly attractive blonde with impressive forms, and a huge sex saw. In Russian, this is sexual attractiveness. The quality of the actress, which was appreciated by both the audience and the producers. In general, Marilyn Monroe perfectly corresponded to the beauty standards of that time. In the 50s, the first post-war decade. In the United States, the economy is booming and the birth rate is booming. A married woman with several children is a role model. An hourglass figure with lush breasts, a booty, and a narrow waist is the ideal of femininity. Today, everyone is trying to lose weight, but in the 50s in America, on the contrary, women tried to gain weight. Being thin wasn't cool at all. Advertisements and magazines literally shouted, "Gain weight, men don't need your bones. Add a kilo quickly." It is clear that only thanks to the forms of a superstar, you will not become an important part of that very sex. And in general, Marilyn's charisma had a unique manner of movement and speech. Directors in various films actively used her famous swaying gait. Marilyn's voice and timbre were completely unique. She spoke softly. At the beginning of my career, this was a big problem. She had to work with a teacher for a long time to learn to speak louder. But in the end, the voice became a calling card. And perhaps the most important aspect of Marilyn's attractiveness was the naive expression on her face. In combination with that very sex appeal, it gave a unique effect. Attracted the male part of the audience and at the same time did not repel the female. In the 50s, the infamous Hays Code was still in effect in America. In fact, it was the state censorship of morality. The code forbade matting, nudity, and sex in movies. It was not recommended to demonstrate scenes of violence of immoral behavior for very long kisses, especially with a negative character. And these are not all restrictions. But as you know, you can prohibit showing sex on the screen, but this will not stop people from wanting to rub against each other. In the scenes with Marilyn, the directors did not seem to show anything forbidden, but at the same time, there was still sexual tension on the screen. It worked flawlessly on the public. In 1955, the film Itch of the Seventh Year was released. The one where there is a legendary scene with a rising dress. And a few years later, a picture appeared on the cinema screens. Some people like it hotter. Soviet viewers saw it under the name Only Girls in Jazz. By the early 60s, Marilyn Monroe was perhaps the most famous woman in the world. She was adored both in America and abroad. Millions of people dreamed of talking to her, touching her, getting her number. However, in a couple of years, everything will change. She will be lonely and depressed. Early Sunday morning in August 1962, she will be found dead in her own bedroom. At the same time, the FBI will come to the office of the local telephone company. They'll seize Marilyn's phone records. It is still unknown where these records are. Who did she call a few hours before her death, and what happened to the legendary actress? Was it suicide or murder? To figure it out, let's start over. The drama of Marilyn Monroe began even before she was born. The mother of the actress Gladys Monroe worked with the film at one of the Los Angeles film studios. Charles Gifford was her boss and boyfriend. On the 1st of June, 1926th year, a girl was born, whom a couple of decades later, the whole world will recognize as Marilyn Monroe. For parents, this was not a joyful event. Charles was only divorced, was not going to start a family, and, after learning about the pregnancy, merged. Gladys Monroe had already had 2 unsuccessful marriages and 2 children, whom she left with her ex-husband. The newborn girl was given the name Norma Jean. That's what she'll be called for the first 20 years of her life. The mother in some documents of her daughter indicated the surname of her first husband Baker. In other documents, the surname of her second husband Mortensen. Norma Jean's real father's last name didn't appear anywhere. Gladys Monroe was 24 years old at the time. She still wanted to live her own life and not become a single mother. She had already had a bad experience with her first 2 children. Therefore, Gladys decided that it would be better if the girl was raised by other people. Norma Jean spent the first 7 years of her life with the Bollender spouses, pious strict people who, in addition to the norm, raised several other people's children. For each of them, the guardians received payments from the state. At the same time, the girl refused to raise not only her own mother, but also her grandmother Della Monroe. She was living near the guardian's house at the time. When Norma Jean was 1 year old, her grandmother broke into the Bollender house and tried to strangle her 1-year-old granddaughter with a pillow. One of the guardians managed to interfere and called the police. Della Monroe was sent to a psychiatric hospital. There she was diagnosed with manic depressive psychosis. Today, this disease is known as bipolar disorder. A month later, Della Monroe died. When Norma Jean was 6 years old, she said for the first time that she wanted to be an actress. Her guardians, the Bollender couple, reacted very negatively to this. They were religious and forbade children to watch movies. "We go to church, not to the movies," the Bollenders said. In 1933, when Norma Jean was 7, her mother decided that she was finally ready for parental responsibilities. She bought a house on credit and took her daughter. Gladys and Norma got furniture, bought a beautiful piano. It seemed to both of them that a new life had begun. A few months later, Gladys Monroe had a nervous breakdown. At the hospital, she was diagnosed with schizophrenia. For the rest of her life, she will spend a lot of time in psychiatric hospitals. Being already a famous actress, Marilyn Monroe will buy a piano that stood in her and her mother's house and put it in her apartment in New York. After Gladys Monroe's diagnosis, her daughter spent a short time in the families of several guardians and eventually ended up in an orphanage. According to Marilyn's memories, it was the worst place on earth. She did not understand the very fact of being in an orphanage. Norma Jean hated the daily routine and rules of the orphanage. She claimed that she was bullied all the time. She was a quiet and shy child. There is a possibility that Marilyn exaggerated and demonized that orphanage. Many of those who worked there noted that it was almost an exemplary place. Perhaps Norma Jean could not bear the fact that she was in an orphanage, and this formed a negative picture in her memory. One of Marilyn Monroe's future husbands, playwright Arthur Miller, recalled that throughout her life she could walk into a room and immediately understand who was there once in an orphanage. When he asked how she did it, Marilyn replied that in the eyes of every orphan, there is an endless emptiness and loneliness. In 1937, Grace Goddard, a longtime friend of Norma Jean's mother, became the official guardian of the girl. However, even after that, the girl continued to wander from family to family. She lived with some relatives, then with others. According to Marilyn's memories, it was at that time that she experienced abuse. She did not specify a specific person or family. Marilyn was generally the first star to openly talk about the violence she experienced. This fact is being questioned, but indirect signs confirmed this. Until the end of her life, Marilyn suffered from low self-esteem, could not stay in a relationship for a long time. Experienced nightmares, feelings of shame, and suicidal thoughts. All this in adulthood is often experienced by those who experienced violence in childhood. In the early 40s, Grace Goddard and her family decided to move to another state, and she did not want to take Norma with her. She decided to marry the girl off. Grace found a suitable candidate literally in the next house. 21-year-old James Doherty was good-looking and worked for an airline. At the age of 16, before graduating from high school, Norma Jean married for the first time. The newlyweds settled in a small house. In marriage, Norma Jean felt strange, as if the child was trying to play the role of an exemplary wife. According to the recollections of both spouses, they were strangers. However, in a sense, it was the first unsuccessful marriage that led Norma Jean to the beginning of her Hollywood career. After a couple of years of marriage, James Doherty got a position as a sailor on a merchant ship and went on a long journey across the Pacific Ocean. 18-year-old Norma Jean moved in with his parents. They arranged for the girl to work at an enterprise where radio-controlled aircraft were produced. One day a photographer came there. He took pictures of women in production to raise the morale of soldiers of the American Army. He was the first person who realized that the camera loves Norma Jean. The girl collected a portfolio and took it to a modeling agency. In 1945, at the age of 19, Norma Jean signed her first contract. Then there was no hint of the legendary sexy in the young girl yet. In the modeling agency, her type was defined as the girl next door. That is, a simple friendly girl that you can easily meet next door. She was very active in acting. Her photos have appeared on the covers of American and international magazines. After some time in a modeling agency, she was persuaded to dye her hair, and Norma Jean became a blonde. At the time, her husband James Doherty was in a parking lot in Argentina. He got his hands on a magazine with a Norm on the cover. "Look, this is my wife," he told the sailors. They grinned incredulously in response. Thanks to her success in the modeling business, Norma Jean was noticed by casting agents of the 20th Century Fox film studio. After several test shoots, she received a one-year contract with a very modest fee. One of the studio bosses said that Norma Jean doesn't sound like a movie star's name. He suggested the name Marilyn. She took her mother's maiden name. So the actress Marilyn Monroe was born. In 1946, Marilyn is 20 years old. Her husband, James Doherty, had just returned from a 2-year voyage and expected his wife to take up household duties again. However, Norma Jean changed not only her name, but also her plans for life. She wanted to focus on her career as a film actress. The couple divorced. During the year of the first contract, Marilyn Monroe starred in several cameo roles. Some of these works looked like this. Noticed Marilyn Monroe. This is Marilyn. 2 words and 2 seconds on the screen. A year later, the studio decided not to renew the contract with the young actress. Then, Marilyn realized the rigidity of the industry she got into. There was no shortage of young pretty girls. Everything depended on her now. Difficult times have come for a young actress without a contract. Sometimes she was offered rare photo shoots, but sometimes it wasn't even enough for food. Alone and without work, Marilyn found herself an interesting entertainment. She wore the tightest sweater possible and walked along Hollywood Boulevard to collect admiring glances from passersby. She needed attention, she needed people to like her. First of all, of course, men. Even 10 or 20 years ago, in Hollywood, there was a practice of getting on the screen through the bed. I think everyone knows who Harrow and Weinstein are. What can we say about Hollywood of the 40s and 50s, a time of absolute dominance of men in the industry? For a pretty young girl who wanted to break through to the screen, there were not so many ways. At that time, parties were held in Hollywood, where many influential representatives of the industry gathered. There were also young, attractive girls present. Many of them tried to find contacts to get into the world of big cinema. Of course, this did not happen for thanks, but assumed sex. Marilyn found a similar pretty. They turned out to be an immigrant from Russia, an influential producer Joseph, aka Joseph Schenk. At that time, he was around 70. Thanks to Schenk, Marilyn Monroe signed a 6-month contract with Columbia Studios and got a role in a low-budget musical film Chorus Girls. Marilyn played a minor character. The film was released in 1948, was not a success, and Columbia did not renew the contract with Monroe. It's funny that in the 50s, when Marilyn became a star, the studio re-released the film, replacing the posters. This time, there was a large image and the name of Marilyn Monroe. The contract with Columbia and the patronage of Schenko ended. Marilyn was out of work again. She's looking for a new protege. It was Johnny High, the vice president of one of the leading acting agencies. He was in his 50s, and he was crazy about Marilyn. She became his mistress. Thanks to the patronage of Hyde, Monroe got roles in the films Asphalt Jungle and All About Eve. Both films were a success with both the audience and critics. In 1951, both films received numerous Oscar nominations. Marilyn did not play the main roles there, but both producers and the audience began to notice her. 20th Century Fox Studio has signed a new 7-year contract with Marilyn. According to its terms, at first the actress had to receive $500 a week. This, of course, was good money, but it does not go to any comparison with the size of the fees of modern Hollywood actors. Thanks to the contract, Marilyn received a new, not yet major, but notable role. Gradually, she gained the status of a sex symbol. 1952nd year became a landmark in Marilyn's career. Then, the films Skirmish in the Night were released, and You Can Enter Without Knocking. Both films are dramas with thriller elements. These are some of the few serious roles in the career of Marilyn Monroe. Watch these films, and you will see that she was a good enough actress. Yes, perhaps not brilliant, but clearly not mediocrity, as some people think it is. Then 26-year-old Marilyn was not yet a superstar, but already quite famous. At the same time, posters with a naked blonde on a red background appeared in barbershops, garages, and men's locker rooms in America. Many recognized this girl as Marilyn Monroe. I can't show these photos in full, but still on YouTube. If you're interested, Google to help. I must say right away, there is nothing there that could surprise an internet user in 2021. But the beginning of the 50s is a completely different matter. Then it was practically pornography, and for a famous actress, naked photos meant the end of her career. Playboy magazine didn't exist then. 20th Century Fox studio bosses were furious. They persuaded Marilyn to publicly declare that she was not depicted in the photos. However, Monroe acted differently. She publicly admitted that these are her pictures. In an interview, Marilyn said that a few years before, when she did not have a job and money, she was filmed, including nude. It was a very risky move. The whole country was discussing the story. The public had never seen naked photos of a famous actress before. Marilyn knew that she had already been called a sex symbol, and nude photos would only fuel interest in the rising star. In short, the girl was smart and knew how to hype even before it became mainstream. The films that came out during the next 53rd year were incredibly successful. Niagara, How to Marry a Millionaire, and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes tore the cinema box office. It happened not only because of the scandalous photos, but they certainly helped. Marilyn Monroe has become a superstar and the main sex symbol of America. In the same year, the first issue of Playboy magazine was born on the cover of Marilyn Monroe and inside the same photo shoot, on a red background. It was a well-deserved glory. For a girl who has always been shy and talked quietly, she has come a long way. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, it's a musical with songs and dances. Marilyn Monroe fanatically honed every move. She was engaged as a teacher of vocals and choreographers. After a whole day of filming, the actress usually continued to rehearse. That's also why the situation with her fee looked like a blatant injustice. In the film, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes starring Marilyn Monroe and Jane Russell, Jane got $150,000 for this job. Marilyn still had a 7-year contract with 20th Century Fox, which at that time paid her $1,500 a week. And this despite the fact that films with Monroe's participation brought a lot of money. Bosses from 20th Century Fox refused to renegotiate the contract. Firstly, why pay if you cannot pay? And secondly, it was difficult to work with Marilyn. It started before the star roles. She was often late for filming, did a lot of takes, and there was always an acting coach on the set with her who watched her play and gave comments. Of course, most directors didn't like it. The major success of light comedies with Monroe's participation finally secured for her the role of a stupid sexy blonde. The studio acted on the principle of give me the same thing, but only different, and Marilyn got similar roles to each other. No one was interested in the opinion of the actress herself. Her new project was to be a musical comedy starring Frank Senators. This time, Marilyn decided to act differently. At that moment, she was having an affair with Joe DiMaggio, a legendary baseball player who has already finished his career with us. He is mostly known as Marilyn's second husband, but in the early 50s in America, he was known perhaps no less than Monroe. They got married and flew to Japan, where DiMaggio had business. At that moment, Marilyn was supposed to be on the set of a new Sinatra movie. However, she flew to the other side of the planet and stubbornly ignored calls and messages from the studio. During the trip, Marilyn Monroe realized the full scale of her own popularity. The plane landed at Tokyo Airport. Thousands of Japanese fans were waiting for Marilyn there. The police barely restrained the aggressive crowd. After Japan, Monroe and her husband flew to Korea, where Marilyn was offered to perform for soldiers at an American military base. The concert was held outdoors. It was very cold. The footage shows wrapped-up soldiers in hats. At the same time, Marilyn was in an open dress. She explained this by saying that this is how the soldiers want to see her. For Marilyn, the attention and admiration of the crowd was vital. Joe DiMaggio hoped that problems with the studio and their marriage would make Monroe think about retiring. But it was impossible for Marilyn. In addition, it became obvious that, despite all the fame of DiMaggio, the main star in their marriage was his wife. Disputes and disagreements grew. As a result, the marriage lasted less than a year. Around this time, Marilyn Monroe started having problems with pills. She had difficulty sleeping. Doctors prescribed medications for her, but she abused pills and alcohol and could appear on the set in an absolutely broken state. However, so far, it has not greatly hindered her career. Marilyn managed to convince the studio to renegotiate the contract. Finally, her fees began to correspond to the star status, but most importantly, she received creative freedom. Monroe could choose projects and approve directors, an unthinkable luxury for actors of that time. The same film with the senator was never made, but new projects promised much greater success. In 1955, the picture Itch of the Seventh Year, one of the main works in the career of Marilyn Monroe, was released on the screens. The story of a middle-aged man obsessed with fantasies about his attractive neighbor. The scene with the developing white dress has become legendary. The film was liked by critics and collected a huge box office. In the same year, Marilyn Monroe moved to the other side of the country, to New York. She joined Lee Strasberg's legendary acting studio. There they taught Stanislavski's system, the art of reincarnation, by understanding the deep emotional experiences of the character. In New York, the actress founded her own company, Marilyn Monroe Production, to work on future projects. All this proves once again that, despite the on-screen image of a frivolous blonde, she was a smart enough person in life. During this period, Monroe began to visit a psychotherapist. He was able to identify the main psychological problems of Marilyn, among which were low self-esteem, and the constant need for approval from others, the fear of being unnecessary, and the inability to have a long-term relationship. All this contrasted very much with the image of a light, attractive blonde, who was known to the general public. In New York, Marilyn began an affair with Arthur Miller, a famous playwright and recognized intellectual of his time. A year later, they got married, and Monroe and her husband returned to Los Angeles to continue working. Over the next few years, Marilyn's mental problems began to manifest themselves more and more. She has released several more or less successful films. The production of paintings was complicated by the unstable behavior of the star. Problems with pills and alcohol made themselves felt. Sometimes the actress was unable to utter an elementary phrase on the set, and filming had to be interrupted. That period from the 56th to the 58th year was very difficult in Marilyn's personal life. She got pregnant twice. In the first case, it was an ectopic pregnancy, which caused an urgent operation to be performed. A year later, there was a miscarriage. Despite all this, Marilyn quickly returned to work to start shooting a new movie. It will be the main and last hit in the life of the actress. The famous Billy Wilder picture, Some Like It Hotter, or Only Girls in Jazz, that's what it will be called, in the Soviet box office. A comedy about two loser jazz musicians who pretend to be women in order to play in an ensemble where there are only girls. The shooting of the picture was not easy. Monroe, taking advantage of the status of a star, demanded that all the other actresses in the film have darker hair than hers. Director Billy Wilder said that once Marilyn needed 80 takes to say one line. That's the whole phrase, "Where is this bourbon?" Instead, Marilyn was saying, "Where is this whiskey? Where is this bottle?" In short, anything but the three words that were necessary. However, despite all the disagreements and scandals during filming, the film was an absolute success at the box office. Many critics still consider it the best comedy in the history of cinema. Marilyn Monroe received a Golden Globe Award for this role. It was the peak of the legendary actress' career. In a few years, she will die all alone. In the 60th and 61st year, the last two films with the participation of Marilyn were released on the screens. Musical comedy Let's Make Love and drama The Restless. Both films were not successful at the box office and received mostly negative reviews. There was talk of the end of the Marilyn Monroe era. She was 35, and that naive, slightly childish expression on her face, for which the audience loved her, was a thing of the past. It became increasingly difficult to maintain the status of a sex symbol. On the set of the last two pictures, she was already heavily abusing pills and alcohol. Marilyn was admitted to the hospital right from the set. It became almost impossible to work with her. At the same time, she divorced Arthur Miller. For a short period, Marilyn managed to pull herself together. She changed her hairstyle and lost weight. And although Monroe understood that it was time to change the image, she could not stop being that sexy blonde. Today, in such a situation, celebrities do plastic surgery. At the beginning of her career, Marilyn had a small operation on her chin, but otherwise in the early 60s. The possibilities of surgery were severely limited. Doctors could not rejuvenate a person. For example, implantation has not been practiced yet. In June of the 62nd, Marilyn had a famous photo shoot for Walk magazine. Initially, the photographer took some pretty candid pictures. Marilyn was very upset with the result. She didn't like the way she and her body looked. As a result, a new photo was taken for the magazine, in a completely different image. Despite all the difficulties, Monroe in the last years of his life managed to impress others, and, first of all, men. In addition to several marriages, she had affairs with the main sex symbols not only of America, but also of the world. Frank Senator, Marlon Brando, Eve Montand. In this series, an affair with President John F. Kennedy does not look like something fantastic. They met at several events in the early 60s. Kennedy had a reputation as a playboy. Rumors about the president's numerous affairs were constantly circulating in elite circles. Among modern biographers of Marilyn Monroe, there is little doubt that in the 61st and 62nd years, she had a relationship first with John F. Kennedy, and then with his brother Bobby. A large number of those who knew Monroe and Kennedy at that time confirmed the information about the novel. The strongest argument of the opponents of this version is the lack of documentary evidence, for example, photographs. But the beginning of the 60s was a completely different time. Everyone did not have a phone with a camera in their hands, and photographers were in no hurry to chase hot photos of the president and his mistress. The unspoken ethical rules of journalism were completely different. No reputable magazine has published these photos. For serious publications, it was not come ill-thought to report the adultery of top officials. The famous photo of a hugging couple, where a woman looks like Monroe and a man looks like one of the Kennedys, is a fake. The only confirmed picture showing both brothers and Marilyn is this one. It was made at a party after the concert, which will go down in history thanks to one number.
Happy birthday.
It was a big event dedicated to John F. Kennedy's birthday. Marilyn Monroe interrupted filming in Los Angeles to fly to New York for one performance. It was after him that many confidently started talking about the romance of Marilyn and the president. Although in reality their relationship was coming to an end. After that evening, the Kennedy brothers began to distance themselves from Marilyn. According to rumors, the president's wife Jackie Kennedy insisted on this. The big blow for Marilyn Monroe was the dismissal from the picture Something Has to Happen. It was from these shootings that she flew to New York for the Kennedy party. Marilyn constantly disrupted work and was unable to go on set. Because of this, filming had to be postponed. The dismissal occurred almost immediately after Marilyn turned 36 years old. In recent years, she has often pronounced her age as separate two digits, for example 35 or 36, as if she was afraid to say the full number out loud. On August 5, 1962, 3 months after her birthday, Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her bedroom. On that fateful night, the housekeeper was the first to sound the alarm. At midnight, she left the guest house and noticed that the light was on in Marilyn's bedroom. She knocked and, not hearing an answer, called the actress therapist. When he arrived, he broke the window in Marilyn's bedroom and found her dead with a clamped handset in her hands. The sudden death of a superstar came as a shock to the whole country. Most Americans were completely unaware of all the dramas that took place in Marilyn's life. Her death has given rise to many questions and riddles. The Secret Services seized records of Marilyn's phone calls that night. Who she called is still unknown. The therapist initially claimed that he arrived a little after midnight, but the police were called only around 4 in the morning, which happened for several hours in Marilyn Monroe's bedroom. Who else visited the actress' house that night? Bobby Kennedy officially spent the whole day of the 4th of August in San Francisco. However, there were several witnesses who claimed to have seen the president's brother that day in Los Angeles. Why then did he lie about his location? There was a hypothesis that the Secret Services and the Kennedy brothers were behind Marilyn's death. Because of this, in the 80s, they even resumed the investigation of the death of the actress, but no evidence of violent death was found. Both Kennedy brothers were assassinated within a few years of Monroe's death. This only added to the mystique. But in reality, the events were not related to each other. Most biographers of the actress are also not inclined to consider what happened on that fateful night of the event as murder. After all, if you look carefully at the entire biography of Marilyn Monroe, then the suicide version becomes the most likely. There were many people with mental illnesses in the family of the star. She herself was a shy, lonely girl, abandoned by her parents. Marilyn has spent her whole life trying to find the approval and attention of others. She never managed to start a family and have children. By the middle of her 30s, she realized that she was losing the appearance that brought her popularity. The world was changing rapidly. The 60s came. The new time needed new heroes and symbols. However, after almost 60 years, it is safe to say that the legendary blonde was something more than just a famous actress. There have been many stars in the history of cinema, but only one Marilyn Monroe.